Hi everybody, this is Nick. I'm here for Normally Cat's Cradle. Today we're doing kind of a catless cradle, me and Kathleen. Say hi.
Yep, it's me also. It is Kathleen and Nick, and we are doing, if it was Cat's Cradle before, maybe it's more of a communal child rearing thing?
Yeah, maybe. We'd sort of an in-between session here. Unfortunately, both Kat and Kirsten could not make it today. Kat is sick. It's her turn on the sick wheel, unfortunately. And Kirsten is having computer problems, so her computer is sick. It's a very unfortunate day for a lot of us. So Kathleen and I were just like, well, hey, we got some stuff to still say about RPGs and all that. So it'll be something fun that we can talk about.
Yeah, we are an endless font of blathering on about things, I think, between the four of us, and the two of us can more than provide.
Yeah, so this may be a little short one today, but we've got some good stuff. We wanted to talk actually about a couple of quick topics. I suppose these would be very lengthy topics if you really wanted to get into them, but something for maybe some first-timers out there, if y'all are listening to this, looking to get into RPGs, and we're looking, thinking, oh, hey, what about actual play kinds of podcasts, that kind of stuff. One of the things we just wanted to sort of talk about today was basically setting up some group dynamics and sort of how to go in between sessions and that sort of thing to take a little heat off the GM for once, seeing as our GM isn't here, so we're going to try and take a little heat off for her.
Yeah, and so I think about this podcast a lot because I've been essentially producing, editing, writing music for it and stuff, and like I said, I don't play as many RPGs as Nick does, I think, but I've always been interested to know some of your approaches to these things, and I've got my own opinions, and like you said, Nick, I know that we've got a couple of people who are pretty new to RPGs, or tabletop games anyway, listening to this show, so I thought it would be fun to do.
I'm actually very curious to hear some of your stuff, because I've been playing games, obviously, and I know I've mentioned this before, for a long time, at least 20 years, so it's been a while for me. So a lot of this kind of stuff I've dealt with, for a while, but, a big thing obviously is, before setting up that sort of thing, getting sort of the group chatter going of what kind of game people want to run. Because you can run a ton of different kinds of games in pretty much any system, assuming it's not something completely antithetical to the system, maybe running a extremely high intrigue, low combat game in D&D.
There are the skills, but it feels like you're leaving half your character on the vine when you do that.
Yeah, that's one of those things where you'd think, well, what if we looked into a more, I should say, rather a less crunchy game, maybe something like Fiasco, some sort of more of narrative storytelling, whereas,
right, yeah.
The other way around, obviously, if you're going to be playing, something like Fiasco and you want to have big chunky battles,
not really going to happen, no.
So that's something though to take into account, when everybody's just hey, a game would be great, even, something where, I really like this setting and I really like the game that we're running here with Kat. But, we did, she did come to us and we all talked about it beforehand and went, hey, what kind of a game should we really run here? And now Kat's doing a little bit of the heavy lifting on this side of things because obviously this is her flagship thing that she's putting together. But
yeah, she developed the whole setting. She is the designer of the game. And so she's got a very good sense of how Amilta works and how it's all laid out. I don't know, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think that we have sort of set up the show to very much showcase the game and kind of the setting in a very real way.
Yeah, and it has been a lot of fun doing that and getting the world and everything set up. But a big part of it was also all of us sat down and said, here are the characters that we're making. We didn't just kind of all, I guess, fall together into something. We said, hey, who are you playing? What are you doing? As you heard back in our very original episode 1 where we went over CareGen and that kind of stuff, as a group, we went through all that stuff, ourselves as well and sort of got into, sort of who would be doing what. Sort of. Kat was still a
Sort
little,
of.
yeah, like Kat was a little, disappointed that maybe none of us are very subtle.
But it's made a lot of fun moments. One thing that we did talk a lot about before we started this campaign was sort of the overall tone of what we were going for. Like, that was a big, big part of the group texts and, like, chats we had beforehand was, like, what are we trying to evoke? Like, are we going to all just be goofing the whole time? And sort of, I think something Nick said about, like, to sort of sum up the tone of a little bit Heroic Court and a little bit sort of Symphonies is something akin to Zelda Breath of the Wild, where it's this post-apocalyptic place that is full of hope and full of people who are doing their own thing and just really living as the world moves on.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things that I really like about the system, and it was a lot of fun to go over that with Kirsten and with you, Kathleen, was that, like, how are we going to sort of fit into this and exploring those bits and pieces. No, I think all, and obviously we've all done a little bit of work with Kat that maybe the others haven't heard yet. But, a lot of the initial setup was, hey, what are we going to do? Like, what kind of things should we look for? What kind of characters, how are we going to get along? That sort of thing. And that's kind of also where we sort of fell into that everybody was kind of maybe not like as boisterous as Cobb or as like easygoing as Penelope, but everybody was very like, we did want to sit down and say, why do these characters actually care about each other?
Right. And I think that especially in a game about cooperation, we wanted to be able to develop some sort of camaraderie.
Yeah, so you have a lot of that going, and now that we've gotten set up, though, one of the next sort of big thing, and one of the things we wanted to talk about here on this was sort of like what we're doing kind of in between sessions, or like, should you do things in between sessions? Again, sort of a question for our younger listeners, and I mean, the sort of like off the cuff answer is if you want to. But it can help, and oftentimes, like, I guess I sort of have it listed here as extracurricular communication, but it's definitely a fun thing where, especially if there's like specific plot beats or something that maybe you want to hit or you think would be fun, or I guess the Cat's Cradles for us kind of fill that in for CareGen, like, which so far has been wonderful. I love Marcus; he's great, and I hope, I really hope that Penelope enjoys the, I guess it's foil that we've got for her.
The foil, maybe the Sasuke.
Yeah, but like that is a big thing where, now I've also been part of groups where folks really like their in between session stuff. And that's fine. Like, I've never really been that big into the sort of thing. Like, I have gamed with folks who will do little, like, essentially, like, not novellas, like, what's even shorter than that? Like, little scenes or skits, that sort of thing. Like, something real quick.
Like little flash fiction bits, little side RPs.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. Real quick stuff, which can be a lot of fun. Especially if for any aspiring authors out there who, I'm just going to assume that if you're listening to a podcast about RPGs, there's probably a little bit of the aspiring author in you.
I know that I write a lot of backstory or like give myself little scenarios of like, especially in the beginning as I was trying to dial in Tissa, I wrote a lot of backstory. I wrote a bunch of little scenarios trying to figure out like who this person is, and especially as we wanted to really develop the show into something that was like somewhat light, somewhat fun, occasionally serious and heartfelt. But like my original character concept was this super heavy philosophical thing that needed to be refined back a lot. And so writing a bunch of backstory, writing a bunch of scenarios really helped me figure that out.
it's a lot of fun when we still get that. But yeah, I think very philosophical, wandering Diogenes style. Tissa might have not really have found as much camaraderie with Cobb and Penelope as current Tissa, who's much more of sort of that, like, I don't want to say thrill seeker, but like curious. She's very curious.
Very curious, esoteric in the way that she approaches things, but like also like pretty warm and interested.
And I think all of the characters have really hit a lot of that, which again, going back to what kind of game it is. And, we want the game to be this sort of like warm and curious and inviting like world and characters. And sure, there's sometimes there's like spooky monsters and that kind of stuff, but they're not like the driving force of the story. They're these sort of like, they're the weird parts of the world that, even if everything is, if everything seems normal, there's always something there, just below the surface if you're willing to look into it, which is, I appreciate them as that sort of, I guess, naturalistic spookiness. They're not so much like they don't feel malevolent, like the setting is secretly super, super dark and grim and it's horrible and terrible bad things all the time. And there's a place for that. A lot of folks like Call of Cthulhu and that sort of cosmic horror sort of thing.
And like there's some nasty stuff in Heroic Accord, but it's not like the game is planning to kill you at any turn.
Yeah. I definitely feel that we, at least as a group, and I'm hoping that Kat is doing this, she could be totally sandbagging us as a GM, but that the horrors and the demons and that kind of stuff there are more there as interesting reflections and facets of the world, and not this sort of like cynical, the world is secretly bad if once you get more than skin deep kind of deal.
Yeah. I think that the horrors and stuff are very philosophically important to the overall message of the game setting to me. And I've alluded to this on a couple of occasions, but like, I think that things might come pretty seriously to a head at the end of Season 1 when the automatons finally get built.
Yeah, we are totally, when it's your turn to have the character, I totally am going to make it an automaton. If it isn't, know very much that Kat and Kirsten fought very hard for your in your place.
I don't trust him.
Okay, I don't want to get too off on a tangent here, but I do love the automatons in the setting. They are very much, again, like one of the big reasons why I got that Breath of the Wild. They feel like the Guardians, where they were this like the Guardians, of course, from Breath of the Wild, going back to that. That they feel like they were originally, built with good intentions, but maybe that some of that has slipped away over time. Who knows what's really going on with the mind. I really like them.
Yeah. But I guess I do a lot of drafting for my character, sort of like paring down how I imagine things are going to react. Like occasionally I have story beats that I want to try to hit, or like a good one-liner I want to work in somewhere. How do you prepare for a session? It's like I'm going to be playing with, I don't know, not this group or maybe another group in a couple of days. Are you doing anything to get ready for that?
I think the thing that I usually like to do, and I like to do this, but I don't really do it that often, is if I have like specific story beats, or if there's a place that I really want to take the character, I try and get some, one-on-one time with the GM. This is going to be a real, obvious thing for anybody, but like, don't feel that like you have to let the rest of the party know at all times what you're doing. It can be a lot of fun if you're like, I want to hit a couple of like cool story beats or character moments that I think would be fun. I really do like to just sort of take characters and say, this is, sort of what their thought process would be in setting, and then just kind of, see where the world takes them.
Absolutely.
I think that's really fun, seeing where that kind of stuff can take you. But certainly every once in a while, I will say, hey, this is something has been going on like in game or in setting, and it's just like, it would be really cool if the sort of like where everything is going with my character came to this head, because I think that would be, that would be dramatic. That would be cool. That would fit in with, a lot of what the other characters have been doing, that sort of thing. I try and get like one or two big things, but I mostly just kind of like to see where things go. Like with Cobb, I haven't really talked to Kat about that sort of stuff yet with Cobb. Probably closer when we get to his, sort of his lesson.
Right.
But I personally really enjoy sort of seeing where like the game takes me. I've always been a big fan of improv and that kind of stuff. So like, and I'm bad at planning. I have to work really hard at it, and like games don't work for me. So I try not to do that much. But somebody who is much better at planning, or at the very least has fooled me into thinking she is, Kathleen. What's your, do you have a pre-session ritual? Do you like to just see where the wind takes you like me? What's your in-between session?
So my in-between session is I try to, when I'm playing, be able to get into a character's headspace as much as I have. But I do like to be able to whittle down what that headspace is.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I've written a bunch of background stuff that I don't intend to ever necessarily put on the show unless it's appropriate.
Maybe we'll get it up on Twitter or something.
Yeah, maybe. Bonus episodes or something. I don't know.
Bonus episodes, or I don't know, maybe somewhere on the website of like extracurricular reading. I don't know.
Who knows? But
maybe it'll show up there sometime, dear listeners.
a lot of it's kind of drafting for me more than for anybody else, so I can know what I want to do. I definitely have a character arc, sort of not set in stone, but like general ideas of where I want Tissa to go.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of like, I spent a lot of time figuring out like what her values were. And her values kind of are a lot like mine, I have to admit, kind of sheepishly.
Well, it's always going to happen. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. There are a few speech patterns that like I've noticed myself doing when I was role-playing, and then like was like, okay, I should codify that. Like, on the Beryl Green, Tissa was concerned about what the boat felt, and on the island was considered about what the island felt, but doesn't feel comfortable ascribing that sort of motivation to people, for instance. And that's not something I have to state out loud, but it's something that's fun to me to work into her speech patterns.
Oh, okay. That's actually kind of interesting. I have not picked up on that. So that is cool to hear that. So I'm gonna have to go back and pay more attention to our previous episodes to see if I can.
And I'm not a perfect role player, but that's sort of like an ideal I can aspire to, and that can help shape the way that I take a scene.
I mean, that's also, again, like, listeners don't think that you have to like nail it every time. Even just saying like, this is a direction that I want to take a character, and like, if it helps you come up with like how they'll react and where they'll go, then, it'll come out in due time. Even if some of your friends at the table are kind of ill-observant, but it's neither here nor there, except for the fact that it's totally here and there. But
both those things.
It's totally both of those things. But before I throw myself under the bus too much more, one thing, though, that we also wanted to talk about this time about preparing is that while, preparing for the game is very interesting and there's all sorts of stuff that you can do, we have a other form of preparation that we have to do, and that's for our podcasting, which there is a little overlap, believe it or not. As I mentioned earlier, one thing about prepping stuff is that, getting that workflow and that workspace and just sort of getting in the headspace of doing this sort of thing.
I think that it's really important, whether you are doing a creative project like a podcast or whether you're just like playing a tabletop RPG with your friends, having a either specific place to do it or a specific time, some sort of like thing that you can do to designate that, like, okay, there's all sorts of other stuff going in my life, but right now it's this time to collaborate with other people. Because ultimately that's what you're doing, is you are doing a big group project, and it's a fun group project, but you still have sort of responsibilities to everyone else in your group to be present, to be doing what you can to make things work with each other and to be having fun.
Now, for any of our listeners out there who might be, after college or working for full time, any sort of that kind of stuff, like, out of school, who have much more regimented lives, like, we unfortunately do these days. The idea of coming up with a time and space, that sort of thing, it's kind of just yeah, we have to. But it is something to think about even for folks who might, be in high school or, in early college before you get completely hammered by high level courses or that kind of stuff, to just, try and think of like, getting into that sort of space. It'll help a lot. And a big thing, especially if we go to if we're, going to talk about more of the podcasting side of things, it's also important to have like not only a space where you can go and do this, but a space that is specifically like set aside or designed for this sort of thing. Like you don't, maybe when I was in high school, I could do like tabletop quote unquote, like in like a bus or something like that. But it'll help a lot, and it'll definitely get people a lot more focused as well if you can go to a place.
Yeah, if you can go to your friend's house, or you can all meet at a bar that you like if you're playing, depending on what sort of game you're playing. Or if you're playing over like Skype or Roll20 or something, being like, okay, it's game time, and so I am going to close off my unnecessary browsers and have a nice quiet space to hang out with my friends in.
And this is obviously double for actually, if you do want to do a podcast, of coming up with a place where, the sound isn't going to be too crazy. You're not going to be, there's stuff not going to be rattling around outside all the time. Kat, for example, often goes to the library.
At her local library, they've got a cool little makerspace set up that's essentially, it's a sound-treated room. It's got some decent microphones in it, and a computer and a mixer, and she can just have a very nice recording space all to herself.
That's also one of those big things that if you are out there looking to do something like this, the sort of unfortunate reality of any sort of audio production is that there's kind of a quality/budget floor that if you go below is going to just be awful. But again, like going to your local public library, getting into that sort of thing, there are ways to work around that. But if you are going to do it, out of your own home, obviously, you're pretty much looking at, you're going to want like a nice microphone. Maybe you don't need to splurge and buy something super crazy, high-end condenser mic, anything like that. But you're probably going to be looking at like $100 or so for a microphone as sort of like a floor, unless you go like headset or something, like some other integrated thing. And you'll probably want a pop filter too.
If you are recording with a condenser microphone, you are required by law to have a pop filter.
Yeah. If you don't, trust me, no one is going to want to listen to you.
We've been talking sort of about like preparing your room and getting into a physical space that's nice, having a microphone or whatever if you are going to be recording something. But I think that whether you are just playing or whether you are recording a podcast type thing, is have your schedule and adhere to it. So there will be scheduling conflicts. There will be people who get sick or have their grandma come in from out of town, or have like a satyr fall out of their closet and they need to go on a mad adventure through Christian allegories.
That does happen.
That does happen, and one can't really prepare for any of those things. But I think that it's important to maintain your sort of like I can't think of a better word than esprit du corps than that, but there's probably a better one that's not in French.
No, just go with the French. I'm sure our listeners out there are bilingual. I mean, I'm not, but that's because I'm not our listeners.
But kind of maintaining that group cohesion, even just because one person's out doesn't mean you can't do something. So if you want to maintain your weekly actual play podcast schedule, maybe when someone's out, you record talking about meta stuff like this. Or if one person can't make it to the session, maybe you do some of those small scenes. Or maybe you just hang out and play another game.
Yeah, it's definitely good to try and like keep something going because I, like myself personally, I am really bad about if my routines get disrupted. It is very hard for me to get back on track, and so doing that sort of thing, having a maybe it's a backup game, maybe it's we can say that this person was sleeping during the session or something like that, or maybe it's just, hey, a couple of us are here, want to play video games or watch a movie or just something to keep that time and that space like a thing that you're doing, because it will slip away if you miss enough, because then people start to lose that sort of like that meaning of what this time and this day and this place means. And it can be very hard to get that back.
It can be very hard to get that. Like once things start slipping, and especially if there is an expectation of things slipping.
Yeah.
That kills your momentum so fast. So find something to do.
Yeah. Even if that's something, again, even if it's not super perfect, or if it's something that you're just kind of like, we've only got the energy for this today. And you know what? As long as you're out there and you're doing something and you're keeping that sort of like that time alive, then, you can hang on to it. And that's very important these days.
Yeah, no, it's just very important.
It's just very important. I was going to say it's very important. When I say these days, I meant for myself personally. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just in general for people. And certainly once you get a little older and you're not in school or anything anymore, and, people start to have families, or people have families, or people, just have work or other things that they have to do, there is always something that can fill time that people want to do and, and will put in that place if something starts slipping. So yeah, when it's gone, it's going to be real hard to get it back.
I mean, I'm just very excited to record every week. Partially because y'all are my friends, and it's not a decade yet that we've known each other, but it feels like nigh on.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it has been, because it was 2009.
It was oh shit. Yeah, it was. And so it's like I'm really excited to hang out with my friends, but I think that it's important to have a group dynamic where it's like, this is a place where I get to go and do this thing, and I don't get to do that anywhere else in quite the same way. And I think that that's a really powerful thing about either playing a tabletop RPG or an MMO or a creative project or whatever have you. Having a thing that you do with people you don't get to otherwise see is great. It's great, and it's worth fighting for.
It very much is. And I guess on that note, well, I should say it's not a note anymore because I'm out of notes. Well, how about you?
I think that that's a good little discussion about what we do and why we've been doing it. It may be a little rambly, dear listeners, but on the topic of scheduling problems, as we said, we kind of had a couple of folks vanish on us today. So we wanted to get something out there for you. As we went over, it's important to keep that space alive, and so we're doing our best to keep our space alive for you. And I hope you can do the same out there. Oh shoot! Give me a second here. I do not know all of the outro stuff that Kat does. I'm so obsessed with ruining it that I've never bothered to learn it correctly. The shoe is on the other foot now.
I know. Right. Okay. Yeah. So,
yeah. that's approximately the end of the episode. You can check us out at peachgardengames.com or at peachgardenrpgs on Twitter. Please use the email contact form on peachgardengames.com or just send us pictures of things on Twitter. Like and subscribe to the podcast. I hate that the world runs on this kind of intention economy, but it does. And that'll help us out.
Yeah. It's not great, but we forgive you listeners for following in its footsteps. If you'll forgive us for also following in its footsteps. But I think at this point we're good friends. I think we all know what's going on.
We all know what's going on. We know which way the wind's blowing.
And maybe this will all be edited out. But unfortunately, I am a little sad that Kat wasn't here to watch me flub the ending harder than I ever had, not on purpose.
Well, she will get to listen to it someday and cackle her... Well, I was going to say little, but then she would object to me calling her little because she's in fact taller than any of us. Laugh her head off.
So hopefully we didn't bore you too much this week, listeners.
Well, don't put it like that. So say thanks for sticking around for an unusual episode. We had fun chatting. We hope you had fun listening. And we hope it inspires you a little bit in your own creative projects or tabletop games.
Yeah, you know what? Let's go out on a good note. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to us. We hope that we can. This was interesting for you, and that you got something out of it. And we'll see you next week, where hopefully the rest of us will be back, and we'll continue. Well, we'll continue on game time.
All right. Thanks for listening. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening. I'm running out of energy. Please stop podcast.